It's 4 o'clock. It's Saturday. It is nice and
We start? Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for attending the presentation. So our presentation is about deep power. Deep power is just the name that we have recently invented for our simulation of decentralized power system. So we have been discussing together. I mean, this is Laurent, and I am Vincent there. And we have been discussing this idea of trying to understand how a decentralized power system could work. And then the story is that we have found the call for paper for this conference, which was explicitly requesting some paper in that direction. And then we decided, especially for that occasion, to build a simulation network and to study what such a system is and how it could work in practice. So this presentation is about this experiment, and Laurent will introduce you the content.
So, do you hear me? Okay. I'll guide you through the agenda of our talk. So first, I'll give a short introduction word of the whole context. Why do we need these concepts? Why have we thought about it? Then we'll go into the subject directly by talking to you about, okay, what's the objective? What do we really want to represent? We'll go through a more technical chapter, which is the simulation setup and the implementation. What do we exactly simulate and how do we implement it? Then we have prepared 3 case studies to show you the reaction of the power system under different conditions, thanks to our simulator. And then we will conclude on a short word and tell you about what we think further research could be. So let's start with the first chapter with an overall introduction. And I will start with this question. Is today the last day of our energy wasting behavior? I guess everybody of yours is aware that our world has a very big issue. We will very soon run out of fossil fuels, which is one of the sources which is really fueling our whole economy and our whole society. But let me first start with the first point. You all know also, I'm very sure, about climate change. Sorry? You all know, I was sure about that. So, climate change, I won't talk very long about it, but the point is that humans are so many on this world, and our standard of living are so high now that we are we're polluting this whole world, including with CO2. This will lead to climate warming, and this will lead to probably major disasters, diseases, etc. You all know that the international community, all the states are starting to react, but it is a huge challenge. So this is one of the points of the context which is really important to understand, that on this side things will change. There is on another side things which are maybe not for tomorrow, but for actually pretty soon. Fossil fuels are not forever. We are really using this planet at a very fast speed for the moment. Some figures of what I found on the internet, and I know there are a lot of talks about it, but people believe that oil resources will be over in 20 to 50 years. Gas resources in 50 to 80 years. Coal, a bit more, but still only 100 to 150, and uranium, which is fueling our nuclear power plants, maybe 30 to 60 years. So now this is not tomorrow, but this is, 1 or 2 generations. So we will probably still be alive when the first effect of this will really hit us very strongly. And one of the things I heard very recently is this quote from the chief economist of the International Energy Agency, who believes that global oil production is likely to peak in about 10 years. So can you imagine 10 years? It's actually very soon. So the aspect we are going to focus in this speech is power system. So power is one of the big CO2 emitters, and we will try to find one of the solutions which can actually help to resolve these problems. The key constraints of future power systems, first, fuel prices will be very high. In the future, due to CO2 taxes or due to fuel constraints, prices will be high. So we will have to go more and more into renewables. Problem of renewables is that a lot of them are actually uncontrollable or unpredictable. When there is wind, we have electricity. When there is no wind, what do? Big constraint. And actually, I'm sure all of you know about it, but in a power system, all the electricity consumed has at all times, every second, has to be injected into the system. So when there is no wind, what do? That's actually the whole point of this discussion and of the simulator we have built. Now, the simulator we have built, it's actually simulating what is called now a smart grid. What is a smart grid? Well, let me first talk to you about a traditional grid. In a traditional grid, it's actually from the production side that the balance between injection and production is reached. The consumption, you and me, we don't care if there is wind or no wind, if the electricity is expensive at that time or not. We just consume. And the producers have to adapt. On a smart grid, the things get a little bit more evolved. There, people and consumers are encouraged to participate to this balance. They will receive a signal that will tell them now it's cheap to consume or now it's expensive to consume. You could imagine different level of consumption behaviors. The most simple one is a kind of night and day tariff. Those of you who have that kind of tariff, you know that you're encouraged to consume more during the night versus during the day, because it's easier, there is less demand during the day. And there is the other extreme, which would be a kind of fully automatic communication system between all the sources and all the productions. So imagine a village or a system where every load, before consuming, is actually giving a bid, asking, I want to consume, and the source saying, I want to produce, and the system will actually reach this balance by this way. And this is actually what we want to simulate, to see how it works and to see what are the limits of this system. We're talking to you about smart grids, but it's not our invention. It's something which could become, in the next 3, 4, 5 years, a very, very hot topic. And just to give you some quotes, starting with the first one, a quote from an official from Microsoft, and he says that a combination of advanced software and internet-based services can help people track, understand, and manage their personal energy use. And this guy from Microsoft was actually commenting on a smart grid application that Microsoft is currently building. So Microsoft is entering into this business. Another quote from another company you know about, which is Google. And he says, we believe consumers have a right to detailed information about their home electricity use, and homes must be equipped with an advanced energy meter called smart meter. And this is something which is already being implemented in some countries. Actually, we are going to simulate something which goes a little bit further. But what the guy of Google said, it's because actually Google has invested recently 100 million euro in a joint venture which will actually invest in this kind of technologies. And I think the last quote is probably even the most striking. The vice president of marketing at Cisco says that our expectation is that these smart grid networks will be from 100 to 1,000 times larger than the internet. If you think about it, some homes today have access to internet, but some don't. But everybody has electricity. So are we going in the future towards a convergence between the electricity grid and the communication grid? It's very possible. And using this will enable actually people to better manage their consumption of energy and go towards a solution to the two big challenges I was talking to you about. So this is for the general introduction. So what is now our objectives and what do we want to reach? So as Vincent said, we heard about hacking at random, and we knew that they were looking for papers, including on this subject. And since we were already talking about this since a long time and that we knew hacking at random, we thought we're going to work on that. And so our objective was to build a simulator which is able to reproduce the behavior of decentralized power generation. Well, now, decentralized for us, it's the decentralization of power production. Today, one big nuclear plant can actually feed a city like Rotterdam. This is not decentralized. We have one big plant feeding 1 million customers. What we want to simulate is the power production which is actually close to the power consumption. We implement the extended smart grid concept, just like I told before, where actually all loads and all sources will participate to the system balance. The price will be the signal for the sources and the loads to adapt their behavior. And there is still one centralized element, which is the price settling mechanism through an auction. Then our objective, of course, is when we have this simulator, is to use it and to analyze the feasibility, the economics of all these ideas. The simulation setup. This is the global setup. What we are actually simulating is a virtual isolated village. Actually, today it doesn't really exist, but why not in the future? We imagine that we have a village, a small village of 100 households, which are fed by photovoltaic panels, which are also fed by some small wind turbines, and we have implemented also some batteries in the systems in order to balance more easily. We will simulate for this presentation one day, and every minute there will be a price auction. So, of course, in the future we want to have a more advanced system enabling to simulate a longer period, enable to simulate stuff which are not synchronous, because now we do it for 1 minute, but it's of course only the beginning of this implementation. Each household has actually a pretty stochastic consumption pattern. If you imagine yourself going home, you are consuming when you get back from work, you're consuming when you're switching on your washing machine, your TV. So every household has actually a quite stochastic behavior. And the total of these behaviors, because of the equations we put in the back, well, it's actually a very standard load pattern for residential customers. You see in the very beginning of the simulation, the beginning of the day, that there is a high consumption. I will explain you why we have this effect. But except from that, it's a very standard load pattern for residential customers. It's very low in the morning, and then it starts increasing in the morning because you wake up, you switch on the light, and so on. And in the evening, you come back from work, you need again the light, you need a TV, and so on and so on. Our simulation setup, so we have some elements. We have one grid, which is the connection between all the components. We have 5,400 loads, because we have 300 households, and in each household we have simulated each of the types of consumers. We have 3 types of load, and I will come back on that. We have the warm accumulator load, and we have assumed that each household has a small hot water boiler with a water accumulator. So you have a boiler with a small tank, and this enables you to switch your consumption for moments when there is electricity at cheap price. You have also cold accumulators, typically refrigerators, freezers, and so on. And then you have all the other types of loads, the lights, the dryer, the oven, and so on and so on. And actually each of these loads is implemented with its own logic. Then we have 153 sources. We have simulated one big diesel engine. Why? Because we still need a buffer. Okay. we still need to have this because in case you have no more resource, otherwise, there would be a problem. Then we have two small wind turbines, 150 photovoltaic panels, and 150 small batteries. I will go into some details for the loads. As I said, we have three types of loads. The warm accumulator loads. Typically, here we assume it's a warm water boiler with a small tank. The consumption behavior of this boiler is that it will try to consume electricity and so to heat up the water when the water temperature is low. But when do people use that water? Well, when the times you need. I mean, you need more water at 8 p.m. than at 4 a.m. So there is a kind of probabilistic function, and every minute we will check, is this guy needing some warm water? Yes or no, and then we check this. So each type of load has also some flexibility, because if the loads have no flexibility, our system has it has no point. So the warm water accumulator, it's kind of easy system to implement the flexibility. We say when the internal temperature of the water tank is very low, it will bid electricity at a very high price, which means I'm ready to put a lot of money to have my water tank heated up. But if I'm already full, I will bid at a very low price. And so the probability that you will consume at that time will be then much lower. Cold accumulators, it's actually almost the same principle, except that the timing are much smaller. Your fridge, you can stop your fridge for 15 minutes. The internal temperature will still be acceptable, but you cannot do that for 3 hours in a row. Then all the other types of loads, it's actually more difficult for these loads to implement flexibility. Because when you get home in the evening, you want to have your light, and you don't care if the electricity is expensive or cheap. You just switch on your light. However, since we still want to see to what extent this variability of the load can benefit the system, we have implemented a logic. The logic is that the first bid of these type of loads is at 20. We say 20 euro, but actually the price level, it's not that the point. But if the bid is refused, which means that there is no wind, for example, and the price of the system is very high, if the first bid is refused, all the other simulations, if I bid again, the price will be doubled, which means that I ask one time. When I ask one time, there are two effects. First, the probability that I ask another time doubles, and the price at which I ask will double also. So I can switch my behavior for some part of it, but not the total of it. And we will see later the result of this type of assumptions. Three types of sources, more easy to explain. We have a diesel engine, very big one. It's the buffer of the system. In case there is really nothing else left, the diesel engine will be there to provide electricity, of course, at a very high price. We have assumed here that the high price is 99, except for scenario 1, which we do at 50, because we'll explain later scenario 1, but we don't need a very high price. Diesel is not variable. It's always available in case there is a need for it. Wind turbines, we have assumed two very small wind turbines of 100 kilowatt. The ones which are built today have several, 10 to 20 or 30 times bigger. These are assumed to be, small wind turbines for the village, so you don't need a big one. They're offering electricity at their marginal cost. When you think about a wind turbine, how much does it cost the wind turbine to provide you electricity? Once the wind turbine is installed, it doesn't cost you a lot of money. It costs you almost nothing. So we assume that the offer price will be 1 euro. How does the wind turbine builder then, can get back his cost? Because we will see in the simulation, but usually you have the wind turbines, but you have also other sources available, which means that the system price will be higher. So he will get the difference. Now, the wind is an input of our simulation. We do not simulate a stochastic wind behavior or something. We assume a wind that we put as an input of the system. And this will depend on the scenarios. The photovoltaic, the third type of load, small photovoltaic panel, 0.5 kilowatts. There are 150 of them. And they're bidding also at a very low price because the marginal cost of providing electricity is actually very low. And the variability, well, the output of the photovoltaic will depend on the sun. If there is a lot of sun, you will have a lot of power, otherwise not. Now, the storage, it's actually an interesting mathematical problem to simulate and kind of optimizing the way you use your storage systems in such a power system. We have simplified the problem, and we have said, okay, there are two zones. One zone where you will consume, one zone when you will produce. Let me take an example. In function of the energy stored in your battery, let's imagine the energy stored in a battery is at a minimum level. So you have no more energy available. It means that you will be you will be happy to consume energy even if the price is very high. That's why we have a high point there. So even if the price is very high, you are happy to consume the energy. And you will produce only if the price is super high, because you have almost nothing to give. On the contrary, when the energy stored in a battery is at the maximum level, well, you will be happy to give it back. So even at a very low price, you will give back the energy. And if the price, since the battery is almost full, you will only consume the energy if the price is really almost for nothing. Of course, all these hypotheses can be improved in a later phase, but it's a way of doing that that for the moment gives some good results. I will give the word to Vincent to explain you more about the implementation of the auction and also the technical elements behind it.
Okay, thank you. So now Laurent has explained you all the different objects that will interact together in the simulation. So now I will explain you how they interact. So the behavior, the dynamics between the different elements. The way we have implemented the system is using a discrete event simulator that is well known in networking simulation. This is called Omnet, the version 4 Omnet. And what you see here is a screenshot of this simulator when we have loaded our different objects. So this interface is already built into the networking simulator. And why did we choose to use a network simulator to simulate a power system? This is precisely because of this convergence that is anticipated in the two networks. So we will really precisely model the interaction between the load and the sources by sending packets on a virtual data network, so that once a protocol is available for trying, we can trying directly in our simulator. So now you are going to see how it works. There is a short video. So that's the simulator in action. We see that the red dots are in fact packets. You can inspect the packet. They are like TCP/IP packets. You can look inside. That's all built in. It's very easy. So yeah, this is a printer which is sending something. Okay, now you see in the middle the cloud is in fact the grid. There is an algorithm there that will collect all the packets. Okay, now that's it. It collects all the order, all the offer. Okay, now he runs the algorithm, and then it sends the answer back to the different load, and then the load and the sources will react according to this algorithm that Laurent has described it to you previously. So according to their state, they will decide what to do next. So in the middle of this system, there is an auction. And the objective of the auction is to find a system price and then to decide who is entitled to consume, who is entitled to produce, depending on how much they want to pay. We have to say that, in fact, this auction is really central to the state at which we will reach into the system in terms of efficiency. There are many different types of auction that are discussed in the literature. This is a big subject, and we have just selected the one that we think is the easiest to try. But there are many different auctions, and they are used more and more today in different contexts. So just to cite one, there is continuous auction against non-continuous auction. We have implemented a non-continuous. That means that we do it at certain time in the day, every minute. But if you go, for instance, in your web bank account and you place an order for stock on Google, for instance, there is also an auction that will decide if you can sell or not, depending on the price. And this auction is continuous. In fact, there is somewhere an electronic exchange where this auction takes place in continuous time. But in electricity market, because in electricity market today, there is already an auction that will decide on the price, but this price is just for big company and for the wholesale market, as is it called. But for us consumer, we are not subjected to this price. So here we are just, in fact, pushing it further, pushing the system further and say, okay, if it works for big entities, why maybe it could work also for small entities. And we will show you that, in fact, it does work in terms of settling a price for every device. Then you have also different auction that says everybody gets the same price, or you get the price that you want to pay. All of these different systems could lead to a different final state, and ultimately to a system that works or doesn't work. And this is something that we can investigate with the system, but for the moment, we have just built the simpler option, a simple option, the one that is non-continuous. But it's just to say that it's also a possibility of improvement. So, as you know now, there is an auction every minute, and the auction will settle the price of electricity for the next minute. So during the minute, there is nothing to do. You can just send your offer or your bid for the minute after, but during the minute, if you can consume, you consume. There is no other thing to do. It's every minute there is an auction. You have to wait for the next one to change your state. Then, as you have seen on the video, the bids and offer, they are sent in a message. And that's very simple. You just say, okay, I want to consume 4 kilowatts and I want to pay a price of 5 euro. Then the algorithm runs and the auction will send a message which is very similar to the message for asking for some electricity. It just says, okay, the system price is 15 euro and you are entitled to consume or you are not entitled to consume. And of course, we suppose that every actor in our system will cooperate and will not try to consume because effectively, in a real system, this would have to be guaranteed by some physical device. But here, this is just an algorithm that decides that solves the problem. But in fact, everybody has to comply. So how does it work? How does it work precisely? And this is really a system that is used in many cases already to find prices in the power market. So we suppose that there are two bits here in this system. There is one that wants 4 kilowatt and pay 3, and the other one wants 5 kilowatt and he wants to pay 7. So if you look at the graph here, this is the demand curve, well known in economy. And if you look at higher price, if you look, for instance, a price of 8 euro, at that price, nobody wants to consume anything, so the quantity is 0. Then if you go down, you find 7. At 7, the second one is okay. Okay, yeah, I want to consume 5. But of course, if you reach the price of 6, he is still happy to consume. He says, yeah, I want to pay 7, but at 6, I will also consume. Then going down to 4, this one also still wants to consume, but below 4, the other one goes in and says, oh, okay, at 4, I also want to consume. And so you see, this curve is constructed simply by adding in the right way the different quantity to create this demand curve. This is really classical in economy. That's how it works. Then for the offer is the same. Very high price. Then, of course, everybody wants to produce at that price. We have two producers, one at 2, one at 9, and they want a price of 1 and 4. So if you are at a price of 5, of course, both of them, they want to produce. Then below 4, the second one doesn't want to produce anymore, and it stops its production. And what we do every minute is that we simply match the demand and the offer, and here we will say, okay, the price will be 4, and the quantity will be 5. And this point there is supposed to have some good characteristic in the sense that it leads to some optimal behavior in the system. So we didn't verify that, but we trust the economists to have found a good system. And at least this will settle the system such that there will be a unique quantity, so the offer will be equal to the demand. And here we see that there are many ways to find other points on that curve, because a little problem that we have with this solution is that you see that these sources will offer 4, but in fact it wanted to produce 9. So in reality, we don't know if it's really realistic that if we have small-scale system, that if you have a fridge, for instance, the fridge wants to consume 1 kilowatt, but maybe if you say, okay, you can consume 0.5, we are not sure it's going to work. So we would need to go and improve that algorithm and maybe just forget about this optimum point and find another one. In terms of implementation, this is quite simple. We have used this framework, Omnet++, which really helps us in getting an implementation fast and easy. We start with config file. So we put all our assumption in the system through some text file with input for the wind profile, for the different load parameters. Everything is inputted there. Then we go to the simulator, which is written in C++. So every object has its dynamic implemented in different files. And then we work in 2 phases. One phase is the simulation that will output a big file with every event locked into this file. And then in a second step, we will analyze this file and just decide what is interesting to look at. And this is in a post-processing phase that we create graphs and video and different analyses that are interesting for us. So yes, to give you the detail, we are outputting the 2 curves that I shown before, the red curve and the blue curve, the demand and the offer. We output that in a file, and then we create a video using mencoder. So we have used all the tools that are available there, very easy. Then this output log file is analyzed with a Python script that we have created, and then we use matplotlib for those who are interested to create different graphs. Just to give you an idea, the simulation for 24 hours takes about 10 minutes to run, like just an idea. On my PC it's 20 minutes, but then it's not a good one. We create a 45 meg file, and it takes 20 minutes to create the video. And the vec file, so the output file, is 285 meg, so it takes quite a while to go through it. And it takes about 2 minutes per graph to create the output. The architecture of the program, for those maybe who would like to join the coding there later, maybe you see it's just a normal architecture. It's like an object-oriented thing. We have 3 different loads. Of course, they appear as 3 different classes that just implement a common behavior. So you just need to be able, if you are a load, you need to be able to send bits. If you are a source, you need to be able to send offer to the grid. And if you are what we call a buyer, so one which is able to do both, then you need to be able to send both. And so that these 3 different classes, and we derive them in each separate classes where we implement the dynamics of the object, so the dynamic that has been explained in the previous part of the presentation. Then we have the communication channel that is implemented by the simulator. The messages are sent to a system that is implemented as a grid object, and the grid has the auction that will settle the price according to the different bid and offer that were received during the previous minutes. So that's the architecture. The type of message, as I said, they are inspired by a TCP/IP network, which is the kind of thing that are simulated usually using Omnet++. So this is quite a realistic behavior that you can implement in no time on a real network. We have encapsulation with a type. Just the type is always set to 1, and maybe for future use, we will have different kind of message. Then we have the type of order. We have 4 different type of message. Either it's a bit, either it's an offer. Then it can be an acknowledgement for one of those 2, an acknowledgement for a bit, an acknowledgement for an offer. And that's it. You can easily parse this kind of message once you know the type of message it is. We have a string also in this packet which says for which kind of contract you are bidding, because for the moment we have only one contract, which is the next minute contract. But of course, there is no reason why we could have different contracts on this virtual market. And we could also have loads that want to consume for 5 minutes, for 15 minutes, or even for the whole day. And then we are already planning to have different kind of contracts depending on the needs of the machine that are part of the network. Then for every message, we have a quantity and a price. And I think this is quite straightforward. If you are bidding, you will put the quantity that you bid for and the price that you want. If it's an acknowledgement, then the price will be the system price, and the quantity will be 0 if you cannot produce or cannot consume, or the quantity that you can produce. So we have put the code, of course, as under the GPL. And we have a Subversion repository on the web. So if anyone is interested to check that out and to send contribution, of course, that would be just perfect. So the code is there and available for everyone to inspect and to use. Now we'll go to the next section.
So time to see some results. As I told in the introduction, we have we suggest to go through 3 case studies. This will enable you to better understand how the system works as a whole. The first scenario that we want to simulate is a scenario which we call the fixed price. So we assume that there is only one big source, the diesel, always offering at the same price. And we assume here 50. So why do we simulate that? It has actually little interest for the effects we want to show, but it's just a kind of baseline scenario, because we want to make sure that the sum of the consumption of all the loads corresponds to something realistic for a residential consumption load pattern. We want also to illustrate the behaviors of some loads. The second scenario, I will show you later the results. The second scenario is a scenario where we have different type of sources. We have the diesel, which is always available, and as I said, bidding at a maximum price 99. And then we have the other type of sources, photovoltaic panel and wind. Now, in this scenario, we assume that the wind is stable, and you see on the graphic, the wind is always producing 100 kilowatts. And just to give you an idea, one household typically has an average consumption of a bit less than, I would say, 1 kilowatt. So since we have 300 households, the total of the system should have a peak demand of something like 300 kilowatts. So the wind is producing about a third of the needs of the system. Besides that, we have photovoltaic. We have assumed that photovoltaic increases their production when the sun goes up, and then it decreases again. It's just an assumption, and it's an input of the system. So the objective of this scenario is to illustrate the price variation. How will the price of the system react with the variation of the sun? And also identify how the load adapts to the price variation. The third scenario is actually exactly the same as the previous one, except that we have 2 sudden drop of wind. So 2 times in a day we assume that there was wind and then the wind stops. The idea of this scenario is to see how is the system able to react to that. Because I remember you that we are in an isolated system and people will want to adapt their consumption to the price they are actually paying. This scenario, we have put it into a video that I want to show you. So the video, which you see here, has the price and the quantity. So it's the price and the quantity diagram. In green, you have the offer. So the offer at €1 is the wind turbines. They're offering a very low price. But the system price, you see, is actually higher than 1. And the other green light there is actually the diesel. The diesel engine offers a lot of energy, but at a high price. And you see the load curve is actually changing throughout the day, because the needs of the people to consume energy changes from 6 a.m. here, and you will see later, at 12 a.m. or at 12 p.m., it changes, of course. The red point corresponds to the system, and we have here, for example, a price which will be about 20, and a quantity consumed which is about 150. Now we are at 9 a.m., and you see that besides the 100 that was offered by the wind turbines, there is also a lot of power offered by the photovoltaic at a very low price. But now I said there is a sudden wind stop. So the wind stops, and you see that the price slowly increases. And this goes slowly. Why? Because the load adapt their behavior from one side, and because the batteries are also discharging. The battery is actually the little line you see there. We have assumed that we have quite a small amount of storage capacity. So now you see we have still very limited wind, and the wind is again increasing. The wind is increasing, the price will again decrease. But it doesn't decrease at €1. It's actually a higher price, and the difference between €1 and the system price is money, of course, that the producers get in their pocket. There is a second wind drop, again at the end of the day, but now there is no more light, so there is no output from the photovoltaic. So the price goes through the roof. We are at the maximum price, and actually people have no other choice to accept a very high price. We arrive at the end of the day, and so that was the simulation for one whole day in case of scenario 3. So let me show you that on some graphics. First graphic, the system price. As I told you, scenario 1 in blue, fixed price. Scenario 2 and 3, exactly the same, except that we have at 2 times of the day a sudden wind stop. And what do you see? Of course, that the price is actually decreasing. I mean, the price is low, and in one case it increases to a maximum because there is no more wind, while in the other case it remains actually quite low. The total system consumption, so it's the consumption of the whole 300 households, is following a certain logic where there is a high consumption in the beginning. So I told you previously, I will explain you why. Well, the reason why is that the initial situation, the initial conditions of the hot water tanks is variable. So some of them are actually almost empty, and they're going to consume energy to fill up in the beginning of the day. So that's why we have a high consumption in the beginning, and then it's kind of normal. That was for the scenario 1 in blue. For the 2 others, we see that actually people are consuming very differently than in case you have a fixed price. They consume very differently, and they're actually following the availability of energy, of cheap energy in the system. And it's actually the opposite curve almost than the curve of the price. When the price is high, people consume little energy. When the price is low, they will consume more. And you see the difference between the green and the red, which is between scenario 2 and 3. You see that the price difference, the consumption difference is very high. That means that people adapt their consumption in function of the availability of the wind. Just to go through some more details, which are the loads that are actually participating the most to the variability of the consumption? Well, we can see here that warm water accumulators, the tanks, are actually participating much more than the light. As I told you, a light, when you get back home, you want to have light. You don't care that electricity is expensive or cheap. You will still switch on your light. So the variability of the light is actually much more small. There is a variability with the assumption we made, but it's smaller than with warm water, where we see typically the red curve, there is a sudden drop at the moments where there is no more cheap electricity. This is another last graphic to explain you the 3 scenarios. The energy stored in the batteries. So this is the sum of the energy stored in all the batteries of the system. Scenario 1 is not illustrated because we assume there is no battery. But scenario 2 and 3, you see that in the beginning it's the same, and the batteries tend to fill up because energy is cheap. But in one case, actually the energy starts to become more expensive. That's the red curve, scenario 3, and suddenly the batteries will discharge. Same kind of information in the information of the energy stored in the warm water accumulators. The measure we take them is the average temperature of the hot water tank. We see, of course, a difference between scenario 2 and 3, between the red and the green curve, where in one case the temperature will tend to decrease because the wind stops, and in the other case we don't see that. So I leave the word to Vincent for final conclusions, and then we open the floor for questions.
Okay, so to sum up, the context of this presentation was that global warming will be there for sure, and there is something to do about it. That in the future we expect that the power consumption flexibility will play a role. And then, what role exactly? The role will be has been investigated in that simulator, and we have shown that simulating 300 households in a realistic way can lead to adaptation in behavior, and in fact leads to a system that works. D-Power, our simulator, is able to reproduce a typical load profile. So that's the case number 1, where we see that in fact this is realistic. The load profile that we get when we have no flexibility is exactly the load profile that we have today and that we can measure and that is available on the web. Then we can model interconnection and introduce flexibility. Then is it realistic the way we model the flexibility? That's another question. We have tried to make it the most realistic, but in fact there are of course places here for change. And then we are able to investigate different scenarios and stress test our system by setting the wind to 0 or setting, for instance, the storage of the battery to 0 and see if it still works. Of course, there are a lot of challenges and lots of assumptions that can be challenged in this work. For instance, we have seen that the flexibility that we have in the system and that helps a lot is coming from the warm accumulator. But in fact, everybody knows that it's not very interesting to heat the water just like that straight from electricity. And so maybe that would not be really an ecological way of doing it. So where could the flexibility come from? There are already other options. For instance, we are speaking a lot about electrical vehicle. This vehicle will be equipped with battery, and they will be plugged at every time we will find electrical car plugged into the network. Maybe this car could provide the storage that is needed for such a system to work. That's an idea that is already discussed in some articles, so why not? But there is also this idea that anyway the local grid will be connected to the main grid, and then we have to investigate how these two systems could interconnect together. For the moment, our simulator is isolated, but it is not expected that in the future all the power grid will disappear. So could this system coexist economically, in terms of economy and in other terms? That's another question that we leave for the future. Then again, we have different axes of research that we would like to investigate in the future. In terms of coding, we think it's a little bit slow and it's difficult to make a lot of simulation. We would like to improve the speed. We would like to add more sophisticated sources also, something more realistic. For instance, the battery. The question that is raised is that is a battery in fact winning money or losing money because it sells electricity and it buys electricity? It would be logical that such a battery would win money. For the moment, we still don't know. That's something that we will investigate for the future and then find out if we can make it more sophisticated. Then there is this idea of connecting the village to the main grid. For that, we would need to simulate the electricity price that comes out of the wholesale market, and also to think about how it could work. Then we would like to investigate also other auction, because we have been quite surprised to see that at some point the auction was not exactly the way that has been described, and the behavior of the system is completely different. So in fact, it seems that the auction is really important, and we need to investigate that. And then there is also this idea of studying in terms of profit and loss for a family. Would a family benefit from such a system or would lose money? That's another question. And that's the end of the talk.
We would be happy to answer any question, if there is.
You were talking about the description, I think, about the generator and the batteries is really naive in the sense that they are simply modeled like somebody wants to help people optimize their energy consumption. While we know from real life that suppliers typically want to optimize for a maximum profit. And when I point, for instance, to the Californian energy crisis, this was entirely artificial because people were maximizing profits and the supply and demand curves started to split. Nobody wanted to sell at a low enough price and nobody wanted to buy at a high enough price, and electricity was actually shut down. I think that's one of the things you might really want to consider in your model. And which I found a bit strange, a few things you said, like the maximum price or decent price as a fixed price. I think that's completely unrealistic and something you may want to look into in a dynamic system. Because I think that's what the main driver of the behavior of such a system, rather than the demand side, where you are looking for optimizations, where I think are really small, but will be eaten away by profit maximization.
All right. Okay, thank you. But, well, in fact, we have not still seen if the battery, maybe on the real system, the power producer have an incentive not to store energy at some point in time. But we have not investigated that. But I'm not sure the battery so far is losing money. In fact, the way that we have implemented the thing here, we will need to check that, but I would not say that the battery is losing money. I think the way, if we implement a battery that is optimizing its profit in such a system, I think that the battery would react as it is reacting now.
I believe that the question, which relates to the fact that the producers behave like nice people who say, my price is at 99. Actually, if there is indeed only one guy who owns a diesel engine, he could say, I don't care, the price is 1,000, and I don't care you pay 1,000 because you're not flexible, you will pay it. I agree with that, but okay, our system is kind of an ideal situation where offer and demand of the market is very liquid, where people actually, every load has its own logic, and every source has its own logic. And we couldn't imagine in a system where, there is not this kind of behavior. It would be possible that everybody bids and offers at a fair price. I mean, but I realize it's an ideal world, but we should tend to that.
Well, that's a small remark. That only happens when the markets are anonymous. And certainly in small villages, politics really play big roles, much bigger roles than actual cost.
I agree. Reality is sometimes very far away from theory.
Yeah, I think this is very interesting. You quickly flashed up the URL with the code and with the availability. I was wondering if you could just put that back up so we could look up. Also, have you written some of your stuff up as well in a paper or something like that?
No, that's the first presentation that we are making about it. In fact, this creation is just for this event, and we hope that there will be a following up of that, that we will be able to indeed investigate the point that we put at the end, but this is the first presentation. And
okay.
It's just a start. We really want to make, something nice of it, and if it generates enthusiasm, why not help on the project? We would be very happy to create a community of people thinking about this issue. Why not publishing a paper or something, but it's the first time we show something about it.
Have you done some comparison of your results of the simulation with real-world measurements, research stuff that's done in little insulated grids? As As far as I know, at least in Japan, they have an isolated grid to simulate load regulation.
I mean, we have been looking to see if such a system exists in reality, if such an implementation has been done in reality. To our knowledge, to that extent, it doesn't exist. There are some, villages where they have made pilot projects to have photovoltaic on every roof and stuff like that. But when you connect the village to the main grid, it changes quite completely the economics and the measurements you could take. Our idea here is to kind of imagine ourselves in 30 years, you have no more fossil fuels, or CO2 are so banned that you cannot use them unless it's the last resort. And this today is not imaginable because energy today is still very cheap compared with the damage we do to ourselves now and to the next generation. Because they won't have energy anymore in 2-3 generations and will be here so polluted that they won't be able to have the same life as we have now. So that's why we think about, let's try to bring a solution. But to my knowledge, it doesn't exist yet.
Okay. Yeah, but to do research on your results, you don't have to make the grid really insulated. You can only simulate it inside this village and using the customer behavior and collect some data.
Actually,
most of the fully connected houses are we able with
most of the data
there.
of the load behavior comes from an article where they have made some extended research about washing machine, what is the probability profile to switch it on at what hour of the day, how many times a week do we use in average a washing machine, how much time does it stay on when you switch it on, all these effects have been simulated, but we didn't have time to cross-reference all these elements, but it comes from scientific articles.
Yeah, it doesn't.
There is a lot to do in this
field. I only ask
field.
for real-world measurements to compare a bit, but
In fact,
results look nice.
that's the idea of the scenario one, is in fact benchmarking the article that Laurent is referring to, in the sense that implementing every number that is in the paper, we add all the behavior and we find this curve that reproduces something that is measured today. So that's the scenario that we can benchmark. And for the other one, then it's really open, because then we have implemented the flexibility and we don't know if it's really possible. In terms of fridge, the fact that the fridge will stop 5 minutes and will just let the temperature rise, it seems really possible today. And in fact, the kind of algorithm probably already exists in some. It would be easy to imagine something like that. So that's realistic. And then in terms of flexibility for the people, would they avoid to switch some light in the house? That's completely open.
Maybe a last question, because I see next speakers only have 3 minutes. Yes?
Did you think about the transportation of energy? I think you need an ocean system for the energy transportation.
Very good point. We do not simulate the constraints on the transport network of electricity. Now here, since we simulate a very small system where, the cable that arrives to your house is big enough to transport your consumption and to transport the energy from, the photovoltaic panel on your roof. And since the village is very small, you wouldn't have that kind of constraint. But if someone imagines to connect thousands of those villages together with backbones, high voltage grid and stuff like that, of course, the auction algorithm should take into account the price difference between different areas because of the constraint on the transport grid. That is very true. But I believe since we simulate something isolated, it shouldn't be a big issue.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We're open for other questions afterwards if you want.